Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining the Alexandria Library for tonight's author talk with Dr. Deborah Thomson. This event is being recorded, so if you are shy about that, you may want to think about whether you're answering questions in the Q&A or the chat feature. Following Dr. Thomson's presentation, there will be times to ask questions, and I do ask that you use the Q&A to separate those from any comments that you have or any technical issues. If you've experienced those, I ask that you do use the chat to reach out to us. Dr. Deborah Thomson is a veterinarian and One Health advocate who started teaching in 2001. Since then, she has served as a science policy advisor in the United States Senate and has founded and led a global organization that inspires children and adults to value the interconnection between human health and the health of the environment, plants, and animals, called One Health Lessons. In addition, she has won multiple public speaking competitions, has spoken in over a dozen countries, and has most notably been an invited speaker at events associated with the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Global Health Security Agenda, and the U.S. Agency for International Development, to name a few. Her new book, The Art of Science Communication, Sharing Knowledge with Students, the Public, and Policymakers, was published in 2021. Dr. Thomson, I'm so glad that you are here and here to talk to us about what you've shared in your book, and look forward to your presentation.
Megan, for the invitation. It is not a person's fault if they don't believe in science. There is no time nor need to judge them. There is only time to understand them and then determine and implement ways to communicate efficiently and effectively. As scientists of all disciplines, we must take the responsibility as subject matter experts to value the importance of being relatable. If we are not relatable, then our message is less relatable. It is time to remember how life was before you knew your discipline so well. How foreign you must now sound to others outside your world. It is time for change. Let's get started. Nice to meet you all. I'm Dr. Deborah Thomson. I'm a veterinarian and One Health advocate, as Megan had mentioned. And I am more than happy to talk to you about this book that I published in 2021 called The Art of Science Communication, Sharing Knowledge with Students, the Public, and Policymakers. The entire reason why I wrote this book was because I wanted to communicate science and STEM in general, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, in a practical and digestible way. Please, if you can, in the chat box, tell me where you're calling in from, what is your discipline, what is your passion project? I'd love to hear from people in the audience and make this more into a conversation rather than just hearing me talk. I'd also like to know if anybody here has seen the movie Don't Look Up. Because the movie Don't Look Up that just came out recently online features well-intentioned scientists that just simply have trouble communicating what they know to anybody outside of their niche bubble. It is such a shame because this has become such a popular movie because everybody seems to relate to it. Well, this book is the answer to that problem. And keep in mind, this is not just for professional scientists or engineers or technologists or mathematicians. This could be for teachers. This could be for students. This could be for parents. This could be for anyone. And I see in the chat here, somebody from, oh, very nice, from my alma mater, Tufts University's veterinary school, who has seen the movie. Somebody else locally in Alexandria and has done science reporting and science communication classes in grad school. Excellent, happy to see you here. Another person from Denver, Colorado, a veterinarian working in the public health space. Some of you may be surprised that veterinarians are working in the public health space, but we do exist. There's another person who says, oh, who says, no spoilers, please. I haven't yet seen Don't Look Up. Okay, that's all I'm saying for now. I see another person calling in from Texas and is a chaplain interested in One Health, which we will be discussing shortly. And another person from Canada. So welcome the international audience. Let's just dive into the background of this book. Why did I even create this book? And where on earth did I find the material to go into this helpful book? Well, all of this material ultimately comes down to my own experience. And I know, sure, I look young, but trust me, I have been very busy. I have been teaching. I've been teaching students as young as 5 and 6 years old, and as old as, and it's not technically old, but 65 years old. So a very large range of students. I was teaching mathematics, English language learners. I was also teaching music. So I know what works and what doesn't work for different age groups. And also I know what works and doesn't work for various cultures, because in an organization that I developed that Megan had mentioned, it's called One Health Lessons, that organization is now global. And just yesterday, I was speaking with somebody in Iran. And then this morning, I was speaking with folks in France. So when it comes to the messaging, I have had extensive background in that. But as a clinical veterinarian, and what on earth do I mean by a clinical veterinarian? I mean the stereotypical veterinarian that you think in the animal hospital, in the animal clinic, taking care of your dogs and cats. My smallest patient was a little dwarf hamster. My largest patient was an Asian elephant, but that's the beauty of veterinary medicine. But how do you convey something as complicated as medicine to a worried pet owner in such a short amount of time in order to save lives of your patients? If you have to perform CPR, for instance, you don't have much time to explain what's the probable cause of this, what is what we call the prognosis, the chance of the animal surviving, things like that. Efficient communication is really the bread and butter, or should be at least, in veterinary medicine. Now, speaking at conferences, I've spoken at a lot of different types of conferences outside of the veterinary profession. And last but not least, I have been fortunate to serve as a AAAS fellow. What that means is the American Association for the Advancement of Science. They have sponsored scientists from all across science and technology, engineering, mathematics, all across STEM. And the year that I was on Capitol Hill working as a fellow and then eventually a legislative assistant with one of the most senior senators in the United States Congress, that experience changed my life, because not only did I learn what works and what doesn't work from the scientific perspective and conveying those messages to my colleagues in policy, but I also saw a lot about what works for leadership and also what doesn't work for leadership. So that's my background. After I was all done working in the United States Senate, I was writing down all of my notes, all of the lessons learned. And I wrote note after note after note. And I looked at these pages and I thought, this needs to be shared. And so I wrote the book. There's an underlying theme here. It's about One Health. One Health can be explained in two different ways for simplicity. It can be seen as that interconnection between our health and the health of the environment, animals, and plants. The One Health approach is teamwork between people of different backgrounds, disciplines, strengths. We come together and we prevent and solve health problems. And we will be talking about that a little bit later on. But as some of you have known, if you have been able to access this book, it's available on Amazon and of course at the wonderful Alexandria Library. There are several chapters, but I did keep this book very short. Why did I do that? I talk about the importance of brevity. Get your message out there. Don't have any extra fluff. And so this book, it is short. It is meant to be in a backpack, in a purse, in a briefcase, in your jacket pocket. It's meant to be accessible. Now let's dive into some of the material here. Here's an excerpt from Intention. My intention for this book is to provide guidance for you, the scientist, to successfully deliver your message and inspire action from your audience, whether it is to prevent people from littering in your neighborhood or convincing policymakers to increase funding for scientific research, particularly your research. With this book, it is no longer an excuse to say that there is insufficient science funding, because it is up to us to convey the importance of our message to the right people at the right time. For the COVID-19 pandemic, its resolution relies on the collaboration of professionals such as physicians, virologists, immunologists, veterinarians, social scientists, politicians, economists, educators, ecologists, engineers, health practitioners, and others. When I see such a list of stakeholders, I have many thoughts. Thoughts like, how many different scientific and professional languages would be spoken in these conversations? How often is there miscommunication? Are the participants satisfactorily conveying their message? How can everybody relate to and trust each other in order to efficiently solve this problem, especially when clear and practical clinical skills like communication skills have not been taught early in their professional training? The end of the intention section goes like this. This book is meant to inspire you to practice communication techniques in everyday life. And there's a strategic method to the layout of the book. I will first introduce you to communicating with people who are learning science for the very first time, like children. Then I will move to speaking with adults who likely forgot their primary and secondary school science because they no longer use it in their jobs, right? It makes sense. At the end, I will focus on speaking with influential adults, some who may surprise you, and who have the opportunity to change millions of lives with their decisions. How do you inspire them to believe in science? It is now time to effectively communicate your own message to those outside your disciplinary bubble. If we want to practically solve major problems, we must, 1, learn how to communicate science in a practical way, and 2, practice the One Health approach. This book focuses on the first step. And again, that One Health approach, what do I mean by that? It's the collaboration between people of different backgrounds. As I mentioned at the very start with COVID-19, could be people from all different backgrounds working towards a common goal. Now, whenever I do podcasts about this book, a lot of people want me to talk about the phrase, a child is like a stem cell. Apparently it resonates with them. And for those listening, and for those who have actually read the book, please let us know through the chat if you remember that phrase. A child is like a stem cell. What do I mean by that? I'll explain it a little bit more. I asked the reader, do you want to change policy that affects the future? Do you also want to change future policy development? One way to do this is to speak with children. A child is like a stem cell that can develop in many different ways. Children may become parents and grandparents and educate their offspring. Children may become teachers and educate their future students. Children may become scientists, politicians, technicians, engineers, and it goes on and on. Education is so powerful, it can affect generations, plural. Living and learning go hand in hand. There are many benefits to speaking to children from a scientist, a professional scientist perspective. Number one, it helps the scientists improve their science communication skills. If you know how to raise your virtual hand, do so please, and let me know and the rest of us know how many of you have attempted to explain science to children. As you know, children are very honest. They show you when they're bored. They show you when they don't understand, unlike politicians who have more of an ego compared to children. So what is the best audience when you want to improve your science communication skills? The best audience to quote unquote practice with is by speaking with children. They ask questions that make you think and think on your feet. Once you feel comfortable speaking with children, then you can speak with journalists and other influencers such as politicians, policymakers. Heather says that there's no hand raise, icon choices. Okay, then feel free to post in the chat because that I can see. Thank you. Now, for those out there who are listening in and you are what we call PIs, you're the head of the food chain in research labs. Think about the PhD candidates that you are overseeing. Think about the students who you teach in the classroom. When is the best time to start to teach others how to improve their science communication skills? At the moment when a student learns scientific jargon. Diving into more sections. Getting to that's right. Now, some of you who have taken leadership or communication courses may have heard of this. That's right is a technique that you want to hear the other person say. Why is that? You want to establish a relationship with the person you're having a conversation with. And notice how I say a conversation with rather than speaking to somebody. Very different mindset. The quote or the mention of having the other person say that's right comes from the section, if you're all following along, it would be starting on page 29, entitled 4 Steps to Change the Minds of Others. Now, the first step is to respect comfort zones. The second step is to talk about the cost of changing one's mind. The third step is to address the cost of not changing. And that's where the that's right falls in. Because once you have somebody say that's right, that means that they're actually listening to you. But of course, that's the third step out of 4. The fourth step is to end on a high note. You have to provide hope. Nobody wants to hear just problems. And I talk about this later on in the book when we focus on speaking with policymakers. Don't ever go to a policymaker and say, here's the problem, here's the problem, here's the problem, and you don't provide any solution. What's the point? They'll just know about this problem, and unless they take it upon themselves to expel some of their extra energy to do some deep dives, it's not going to happen. Make it as easy as possible for your audience to relate to you and understand your message. But this next section is going to be on the longer side, but I felt like it was probably one of the most important sections of the book that I wanted to share with you. How to speak about a controversial topic. There are 3 rules to keep in mind. Number 1, be honest. Number 2, remember that education is power. And number 3, lead the conversation. Feel free to close your eyes, have some tea while I read this section of the book. Rule number 1, be honest. Science is always changing with new discoveries. Sometimes science reverts backward because a recent discovery disproves a past and generally accepted theory. The general public does not understand that this is the way science works. Take medicine, for example. Clinicians, such as physicians, veterinarians, dentists, we read many journals discussing new therapeutics, new standards of care, and new discoveries, and then we have to translate this hard science into something applicable to our patients. Clinicians, just like researchers, we're only human. However, a person sick in a hospital does not want to think of their physician as human, who's capable of making a mistake. Patients trust physicians with their lives. There is a lot at stake in making a mistake. Sometimes, however, a clinician does not know why the patient, person or animal, is sick. Sometimes it is due to ignorance or inexperience of the clinician, but other times it is due to the sheer fact that this is a new disease. The clinician might wonder, did the pathogen just mutate from the local animal population? Or is it an atypical presentation of a known disease? Was it transmitted to the person by a new tick in the area? Did the person drink water contaminated by an unknown toxin, possibly a byproduct of another chemical previously deemed harmless in the environment? There are a lot of unknowns. When clinicians do not know the answer to why somebody is sick, it is okay to say, I don't know. But be sure to follow this up with, but I will consult with a colleague or a specialist to give you the best possible chance of feeling better. So that's rule number 1, be honest. Rule number 2 of how to speak about a controversial topic is remembering that education is power. A controversial topic such as climate change is only controversial because of the lack of niche knowledge and trust. The lack of knowledge is not stupidity. Remember, everybody must be treated with respect and be understood in order to deliver science in the most meaningful way. I have spoken with people who do not believe in climate change. Some of these people work in the US federal government. In particular, these people recognize that the planet is changing, but they do not believe the changing climate is due to human involvement. I am not surprised by this belief. After all, it is much less stressful to believe the changes occurring to our planet were inevitable and have nothing to do with people's actions. Guilt is an uncomfortable emotion that people tend to avoid. Now, how could we change the minds of climate change deniers? Can you start talking about carbon-13 and carbon-14? Remember, the general public does not commonly understand isotopes. Their last chemistry class was probably back in secondary school, and even then, they probably didn't even like the subject very much. However, the general public does know about carbon dioxide and that more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is problematic because it warms the planet. They may know this because it has been repeated over and over and over again on television and in the news. They may not understand it, but they tend to accept it as fact due to repetition. What the general public doesn't recognize is the reason why scientists say climate change is being exacerbated by human activity. The public typically does not know that scientists can determine the original source of the carbon that is in the carbon dioxide molecules floating up in the atmosphere. However, they do know that we inhale oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide. Therefore, it is not necessary to explain to the public exactly what isotopes are. The important point is to explain that there are different versions of carbon, and those versions come with their own assigned number. Through years of research, scientists know that carbon-13 comes from fossil fuels and carbon-14 comes from living plants. When sampling carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we have discovered there's a large percentage of carbon-13 up there. Therefore, fossil fuels are worsening the thickening atmosphere. Now, once the general public understands that, they may start to make more eco-friendly decisions. Remember, trust in science is never guaranteed. We as scientists need to work to make the scientific process and its discoveries as accessible as possible. We do that by using our communication skills. The last rule is the number 3, and that rule is lead a conversation. Once you explain a concept like climate change with a public audience, then you should welcome a conversation. Encourage them to ask questions. Show empathy while they ask these questions. Understand that these questions will often come from a place of unfamiliarity with the subject and not from malice. Everybody is entitled to respect. Show that you are actively listening and try to determine the reasons behind their comments. I often say phrases like, I can see why people think that. I once thought that too, but this is what I was taught since. Notice how I said how I was taught since instead of saying I learned. By saying you were taught, others see you as more relatable, because it indicates that you were once a student. After recognizing their thoughts and comments, you can then describe up to 2 scientific climate-related discoveries that support your scientifically sound statements, but avoid overwhelming your audience with facts, please. Remember, you can have too much of a good thing. If you are patient enough, you will see the crowd shift in your favor as long as they feel recognized and understood. This is an occasion for you, the scientist, to listen and learn as much as your audience. Each conversation is a learning opportunity to improve your own science communication skills. So in summary, those 3 rules: how to speak with the public about controversial topics. Number 1, be honest. Number 2, education is power. Think about that carbon 13, 14 isotopes. And rule number 3, lead a conversation. But make sure it's a conversation and make sure that you are relatable. Moving forward, at this point, you can see why it's important to speak with children. It'll certainly improve your science communication skills, but it will also serve another purpose, which is, of course, you serve as a role model for the next generation of scientists, technologists, engineers, mathematicians. Then we spoke a little bit about how to speak with the general public, particularly about complex, sometimes controversial topics. Then the entire 3rd portion of the book is really talking about policy, how to speak with politicians. Now, you may or may not have been surprised when I said in the book that it is unlikely that for the first visit, unless you are Bill Gates, that you will be speaking directly with the elected official. However, I feel from experience working right in the center of everything that by making sure that your message is well received with the staff who surround the elected official, I feel like that is incredibly powerful. Now, you might remember from the book that there are a lot of different roles within each office, okay? If you do wander around this gorgeous building in Washington, D.C., the Capitol building, you may see lots of signs like this that say members only. It looks like quite an exclusive club. It instills a lot of fear in a lot of people, a lot of intimidation, let's say that. But if you read this book and you practice with Toastmasters, as I had mentioned in this book, and you practice conveying your message with children, you're going to be effective communicators, especially when you're speaking with influencers who can change millions of lives with their actions. So really, what is going on in there? What's going on in this gorgeous building? Well, let's turn on the lights. And this last excerpt of the book that I will share with you is from the section called Life from the Other Side of the Boardroom Table, which is where I lived for an entire year in the US Senate. So far, you have heard that it is important to visualize the conversation from your target audience's perspective. With this chapter and its corresponding material in the appendix, I want to show you what life really is like for congressional staff, particularly legislative assistants, of which I was one, and for you to see how bills and policy get made. In this chapter, I will show you how law text or legislation can be translated into attractive everyday speech. Now that you know how to translate science into layman's terms, it is time to look across the boardroom table and pretend to live the life of a Senate staffer. After all, how else can you effectively communicate with your target audience if you can't imagine being in their position? And with that, I open the rest of our time for questions and answers and conversations. Thank you very much for your attention. And thank you again, Megan, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Thomson. This was great. If you do have questions, you can use the chat, or if you want to use the Q&A as well to post your questions, that would be great. While we're waiting for those to come in, I did have a question. I kind of want to go back to you addressed it a little bit in your having those difficult conversations. One thing I noticed was you returned to this idea of listening to your audience, or having empathy for where they are at. And this can be very difficult, especially if you feel passionate about something, or you feel like you're not getting through to them. Why is this so important, and how do you get to that place of empathy?
Yeah, thank you for that. It can be a frustrating process, and that's where practice comes in. The first step to effective communication is to understand your audience, understand their interests, but expanding upon that, their priorities, understand their fears, understand why they do certain things, why they value certain things. And then from there, you can tailor your message to meet the needs of your audience. And empathy has a incredibly large role in this type of conversation, because the first step is to listen and understand and envision yourself in their shoes. And that was the entire purpose of that last section of the book for the appendix. I want to have the reader know exactly what it feels like to be the one crafting legislation, the ones crafting the bill language that can eventually become law. If you understand that type of process, just the sheer writing of it, then you will have a much more comfortable time in that boardroom where you are meeting with the staff members of elected officials as well as elected officials.
Great, thank you. Oh, we do have a question that has come in. This is from Heather. She says, while you're practicing this art, what happens? How do you rectify the situation if you mess up?
Yeah. Yes. Excellent question. While you are practicing this type of communication skill, what happens when you mess up? We're all human. The thing is, something that's important to remember is that being on this side of the boardroom table, I see scientists and engineers and other constituents, voters coming in, and they're clearly nervous. I get it. They practiced a lot to come to this particular room and speak their piece. I get it. And plus you work under the clock because you typically, well, if it's appropriation season where Congress is managing money, it's 15-minute appointments. If you're in an office of an appropriator, which I was, otherwise you can have, say, 20-minute appointments or 30-minute appointments. But if you're going to mess up anything, it would be really to not do your homework. As long as you do your homework and know what the voting history is of the elected official, if you know a particular stand that they take in, and they've mentioned it in publications like in newspapers and things like that, then you'll be prepared. If you do have a faux pas and you do make a mistake, then I would say stop yourself in your tracks and say, you know what, I'm not really sure about this. Let me follow up with an email. And then just be sure you email them appropriately. And that's, of course, with the influencers. When you're talking about with the public, that can be a little bit more stressful because it's not a private conversation, clearly. So the way to get around that is, of course, practice, practice, practice. But stick to, I wouldn't say a set script because that sounds false. That sounds ingenuine. I would say make sure that you know the 3 things that you want to convey to the public. Not more than 3 things because that's too much for any audience hearing anything for the first time. And just nail down those 3 points. Now, if you're practicing this art and you're working with kids, don't worry about it. It's good for the kids to see adults are only human. Laugh about it, show that you can bounce back, and just keep going.
Great, thank you for that. In the chat, Amanda has written, nice job, Deborah. In the field of business and management, we teach business students to pitch their ideas as if they were talking to an 8th grader. Listening to you, we might need to revise that to a 3rd grader. Students and business professionals really struggle with the KISS principle. Thanks for your contribution to science communication.
Yeah, keep it short and sweet. Exactly. Sometimes while I was on Capitol Hill, and you know what, even in the veterinary hospital, sometimes I see people come in with their pets, my patients, and you don't know why they're coming in. And so fine, you do the physical exam and such, but you don't know if, you know, this older gentleman or woman is just, you know, lonely and they just want to chat with you. You see what I mean? Or if there's actually a problem. And then I saw the same type of thing and you can't identify why they're coming into the office when I was on Capitol Hill. Like, where's the ask, right? So within the first 25% of the meeting, I'd say if it's a 20-minute meeting, make sure it's in the first 5 minutes. Make sure it's absolutely clear immediately after you go through the introductions. Or even during your introduction. Hi, my name is Deborah, and I'm a big fan of the senator because she supported this. I'm here to talk about that. That's all you need. And then from there, you can present the 1-pager that you have prepared, which this book shows you how to do, and have a conversation the rest of the time. Thank you for that question, Amanda. Excellent.
Another question from Amanda. What would you say is the biggest mistake that people make when they're communicating science to policymakers?
Yes, okay. And this I saw over and over and over again. And this, okay, no spoilers, I promise you, but in the movie you'll see scientists use lots of numbers. We work in numbers. I totally get it. But the problem is way too many times after the scientist or engineer or physician or veterinarian left the room, my colleagues would turn to me and go, Deb, can you translate this for us? They know their science, they know their niche really well, but they don't know how to make that knowledge accessible to everybody else. So for instance, if you come with a problem, say, I don't know, a polluted river in your county, fine. You bring it up to your representative. You go to the House of Representatives and you bring it up with your representative and you say, there's a polluted river here. We know this because the toxin level was this parts per million, blah, 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 blah. And then they walk out. And then what do you want us to do? You are the experts. You are the ones who are testing the water quality. What do you want us to do with taking the next step? Do you want us to put a certain amount of money in a certain type of grant, or put it towards EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, or what, like, give us that extra step? Because people on Capitol Hill, any section of policy, I imagine, very busy, and especially the House of Representatives, where their teams are like skeleton teams. There are not nearly as many people in those offices as for senators, but they have to cover the same amount of material. So help them out. If you have a problem that you want to bring up, give them solutions that are feasible. And when I say feasible, I mean practical, actually doing it, but also feasible as in money. And then also just spell out the steps. If you give money to this place, then this could happen or that could happen. And also stories can be very memorable too.
Great, thank you. And Kari has a question. How do we counter growing distrust of scientists when it's being peddled by influential people in society who have the largest megaphones?
Yeah, excellent question. So the best way to counter distrust in science is to, I know it sounds kind of out of left field, but hear me out, is to speak and become friends, or at least friendly, with people in your community, and then have them see science through you. They first see you as a human being, as Kari, okay? And then they recognize, oh, you're a scientist. Interesting. And then you can share stories that you have, of course, have grown to appreciate through science, but that could be relatable. So the first thing is, don't go to somebody and be like, listen, I'm a scientist, you need to listen to me. No. Number one, be relatable, be Kari, be Amanda, be Megan. And then you can be seen as somebody who knows science.
Great, thank you for that. I was wondering, from your experience working in the Senate, do individuals bringing concerns to, do they have the same sway as maybe an organization or a group does?
My goodness, thank you so much for asking this question. One of the biggest surprises I had while working on the Hill was the amount of people, granted, this is important to mention, the individuals who call the office. Number one, offices keep track of all calls that come in. And if you as an individual feel like, I don't know, animal welfare is important, or something like that that's happening in that elected official state, is going to be logged. And the more people who call in about that particular subject is going to eventually be on the radar of the elected official. So you don't need to be a lobbyist. You don't need to be with an organization. You just need to be an individual who cares. Because ultimately, if you care enough to call up and leave a message on the machine or send in an email to the office of an elected official, you represent hundreds or thousands or more people with the same thought. And that's the assumption that's on the Hill, because not everybody is going to be calling in. So everybody has their opportunity to speak to elected officials. And we are fortunate in this country. Not every country allows that. So something to be aware of.
Great, thank you. And then Lee wrote in the chat, all politics is local. The LC handles a huge amount of correspondence, constituent services.
Oh yeah, the legislative correspondents. They are the people who respond to all of the letters that come in. It's a huge job. Also, the legislative correspondents, they are assisting the legislative assistants. And the legislative assistants are often the people who are the ones crafting the bills. They're the ones actually writing the bills and doing all the research and then bringing the ideas of these bills to their boss, so to their elected officials.
Wonderful, thank you. I was thinking you're an author, but you're also the founder of One Health Lessons. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So One Health Lessons is an organization that inspires children and adults around the world to value One Health. And so again, One Health is that concept between our health and the health of the environment, animals, and plants. And then the One Health approach is that collaboration between people of different backgrounds, disciplines, and strengths, and we come together and we prevent health problems. So with the lessons that I have created at onehealthlessons.com, you can go there and see 11 different age-appropriate lessons. The first set of lessons are about COVID-19. So even though I created the first set of lessons in February of 2020, believe it or not, it's not that dated. The material is still viable. It's still very good. And it's still applicable today. So those lessons refer to how biodiversity and ecosystem health can influence our own health, how to protect ourselves today from the virus, how to protect people in the future from the virus. And the best way to do that is through taking that One Health approach, that teamwork approach. But we also talk about what are mutations, why are they important to track, and what are vaccines and why are they important to know about, what's the purpose. And then those lessons right now, they're being translated into 88 languages. We have posted, I think, 26 languages up on the website now. And then the second COVID-19 associated lesson is about the science behind the mRNA vaccine. But maybe even more importantly, it's the woman behind the science of the COVID vaccine. So instead of highlighting, this is the vaccine, this is the only thing we're talking about, I made it into a story. And this woman has been going through so much rejection over the last 50 years. And because she didn't give up, she recognized the importance of her research in mRNA, messenger RNA. Because of her determination, that's the only way, that's the only reason why we as a human race throughout the world was able to develop the mRNA vaccine in record time. So while there are people who say, oh, this vaccine came out of nowhere, it was so fast, it didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of decades of her work but she was so underappreciated that nobody was paying attention to her. But she didn't give up. And that's what the second lesson is about.
Great, thank you. That sounds so fascinating. And it seems like it is truly global. I was looking on your page and your interns are from literally all over the world. It's very impressive. We did have another question come in from Amanda, and this is related to the film Don't Look Up, and sort of along the lines I think that Kari was asking. The movie touches on between the difference between entertainment versus serious communication, and what strategies can be used to compete with entertainment content.
Ooh, that's a good one. That's a good question, Amanda. Thank you very much for bringing that up. So again, what's the serious communications versus the entertainment component, right? I'll say it like this. As long as you deliver the core message, it is not as important how you deliver it. So let me explain this in a different way, maybe with an example from One Health Lessons. When we teach about One Health, when we teach about pandemics, when we teach about vaccines, I've designed these lessons to get the children to laugh, to play, to have fun. So therefore, their attention is really focused on the fun part, but at the same time, they're learning, because they can't win that competition if they didn't learn the answer to the question from 4 slides ago, for instance. So given how the attention span is getting shorter and shorter and shorter with every decade, I think it is up to us to practice and flex our creative minds in order to convey serious communication, so like real hard fact science, but in a way that's digestible. And yes, that movie Don't Look Up was definitely something that you think about long after the movie is done. But I will not spoil any of it, I promised you. Thanks, Amanda.
Wonderful, thank you. And then Lee asked, would you comment on the way that the notion of theory has been, in fact, weaponized to call into question scientific findings?
Lee, you said a really good point there. So in notion of theory, we think something, we in science think something, but we're not 100% sure yet. And we as scientists must be sure and certain once it becomes a law, right? Once it becomes, Newton's law, once it has so much evidence behind it that it is credible. But in times, particularly with this pandemic, and I was having a conversation about the vaccines and the reason for all these boosters and things like that with a medical student just the other day. I was saying, this is a very different time for the scientific community, because we are learning as we go, because we can't afford to wait those 7-8 years, right? In order to get all the tests done and then put something out on the market. So we do the best that we can. We are all human. There is no superhuman here. But the point of the notion of theory, I think it's important to just call back to be honest and to explain that it's not a matter of we don't know because we're not looking for it. It might be because we don't know because we don't have the technology to confirm it yet. Just think about the black hole picture that came out in 2019, end of 2019, early 2020, I believe it was. It was in theory. We had an idea it was going to look a certain way, but then there was actually an image that came out. That's 2019. Yeah, I remember that, 2019. So as scientists, we work with what we have. We work with the best material that we have, and we go from there. But I think it's that honesty that is very important. And once you express that, I think it opens up an avenue to have a conversation. So that way it takes away the weapon because you call it out as it is. Hopefully that's helpful.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Thomson. I'm not seeing any more questions coming in, but if you do have a question, please feel free. We've got a couple minutes left. I do want to mention again, as on the screen, the Art of Science Communication is now available for purchase. And I've dropped in the chat there a link to Dr. Thomson's website and also to the One Health Lessons website as well, if you're interested in checking those out. This has been such a wonderful talk with you. I appreciate you writing this book and giving people tools to make their message effective and really reach those that they're trying to reach. It's a challenge to communicate in any way, but especially when it's something that can be very complicated, make it in a way that everyone can understand. So I think you've done a great job in setting out those steps to get to that point where you're communicating effectively. So thank you so much for tonight, and thank you everyone in the audience for joining us and asking wonderful questions.
Thanks so much, Megan, for this invitation. And thanks everybody for joining. I hope this was helpful and great conversations and excellent questions. Thank you again.
Thank you all and have a good night.